Well, hello there, and welcome to this episode of The Terri Cole Show. And I want to talk a little bit about narcissistic abuse and why I included in Boundary Boss, the book, a whole entire chapter on narcissists and boundaries, right? We call them boundary destroyers because the people in my crew have these experiences and they wanted to know how to deal with them. And in the new book that I'm writing about high functioning codependency, there's also an entire chapter on the connection between narcissists and codependents. And there really is this very attractive dynamic. It's like almost irresistible between narcissists and codependents. And in this episode, I'm actually highlighting a story from someone in my crew who reached out to me. Katre is her name. And she has a phenomenal story, a stressful story too, though. So this is a trigger warning that it's a story about escaping a toxic, narcissistic abuse relationship. So it's not super duper graphic, but graphic enough that I feel compelled to warn you. And it's written in the show notes as well, that it might be triggering for some people. But what I found in Katre's story was the resiliency of the human spirit and how you can survive and you can thrive after narcissistic abuse. She shares the story of how she escaped, what brought her to the moment. Of course, there's going to be some kind of a peak escalated experience that brings you to that moment of wanting to get out, of needing to get out. And then how she healed after that. And now she's become a support and she's created sort of a sacred community where sort of co-journeyers can support each other and share their experiences. And I think that Katre created the space that she wished she had when she was going through her experience. So I hope that you enjoy this interview with Katre Kitchen as much as I enjoyed interviewing her. I'm super excited to welcome Katre Kitchen to the Terri Cole Show. Welcome, Katre.
Thank you so much for having me, Terri.
Indeed. Okay, so I've been talking about surviving, thriving after narcissistic abuse. This is kind of how you and I met online because your platform is all around surviving. And I'm most interested if you would start by just telling us your own sort of origin story of how this became, your mission is to help other women in particular get out of toxic abusive situations, and you provide support for that. So tell us about your situation. What is if you were a Marvel hero, what would your backstory be?
Yes, thank you for having me, first of all. And so my story, what kind of brought me into helping other women with surviving abuse and getting out of abuse is I didn't know that I had been under narcissistic abuse my whole life through my childhood until I ended up in multiple unhealthy relationships. And they were getting worse and worse and worse. And I had moved to America when I was 16 years old from Estonia. And I got pregnant when I was 32. And I was in a relationship with somebody very, very toxic. I did still at that time not know what narcissism was. I didn't know what was going on because now I know retrospect that I grew up in chaos and that's why it felt normal. That was a very scary time of my life. I was pretty isolated and I was on the other side of the world. So I didn't also really have support system. I had my friends and I did reach out to people and kind of bring up some things about well, he's acting like this, but people would just write it off and say, well, he's immature. He's just kind of weird. And I was like, okay, it was just getting worse and worse. And it was mostly emotional abuse. He would be constantly talking down to me. I would have to check in with everything that I was doing. I had to tell him why I took a certain route when I was driving. He was, monitoring my routes. Why did I buy a water bottle from that gas station? How long did I stop there for? He would leave early in the morning and come home late at night, even when I was pregnant, and even to the time when my son was born, he would just gone all the time. But he would come home and make my life absolute terror. And so it was building up from the beginning. I know people often are like, well, didn't you see the red flags? Well, they're not very red when you're used to that, right? So when it's something that's familiar and it attracts you to it, looking back, I did see things. He was jealous. Like pretty soon after we started seeing each other, he checked my phone, he checked my messages and asked
Mm.
me about it. And I was like, okay, well, this is interesting. And now, today's world, I would be like, no way, man, you're gone. You're out of here. You
Right.
checked my phone. But then I was like, okay, well, maybe he was just worried. The things that started showing up really quickly were any type of event that we went to, he would ruin it. And even if we ended up going to the event, leading up to it was so much stress and fighting that by the time we got there, I mean, it was horrible. I was
Yeah.
absolutely, I felt destroyed. We worked out at the same gym and I couldn't, we did jujitsu and I couldn't even work out with people who were different race than me. He would make sure that I didn't do that. And if I did it with somebody slightly different than me, then he would just throw a fit. And so it got progressively worse. My mom came there to be with us when I was about to give birth. I didn't tell her much. I mean, I know she didn't really enjoy his company, but
Mm.
I mean, I was about to give birth, so I was just like focused on that.
Yeah.
And once that happened, my mom stayed for about another month and left. And then, I mean, I was home with a newborn baby and he would not be there. Like I didn't have much food. I ended up ordering it on Amazon. I was like, can you just pick something up? And he was like blaming it, turning it on me. Like, and then there was a couple of very kind of big escalations that happened that kind of
Hmm.
ultimately took me to escape. I thought about it today before our conversation. I'm like, I never had a plan of what's going to happen. So I know that when people are in it, you don't, you know, we talk about and share, like have a plan and do these things. But most of the time, you're like, if you don't even know you're in it, you're just working off your instinct. One of the big things was I'd gone to see him practice jujitsu and I brought my son first time. Everybody met him. For some reason, he was upset. He brought up this big fight. And when he came home, he threatened me with a gun and
Mm.
as I was feeding my baby and he was threatening suicide. He threw a bunch of like a stack. I had these baby shower cards. I was going to send thank you cards. It was like this big stack. He threw them at us. And when I asked him why did he do that, I mean, I was holding my baby and I'm like, what do I do? Like I'm holding my baby. I'm sitting there with a
Yeah.
guy with a gun who's losing it. He's losing his mind
Right.
right now. So I said, you just threw that and that hit us. He's like, no, I didn't. And I said, yes, you did. And then he said he's going to kill himself. And he tied a cord around his neck, my computer cord from my work computer, and laid on the stairs. And I was just sitting like I was paralyzed. I was paralyzed with fear.
Yeah.
And in that very moment, I mean, people are, well, why don't you just call the cops? Well, what am I going to, like there's so many worries. Where am I going to
Yeah.
go? He's going to come find me. I didn't know what to do. I did, however, because it was leading up to it with a lot of fights, I recorded the conversation. I put record on my phone next to me on the couch, which was a huge risk because I was thinking,
Yep.
okay, if something happens right now, nobody's going to believe me. They're going to not even know what's going on. And I was just,
Right.
I mean, my heart was just going. And so I recorded the conversation. What one part when he had a big water jug, and he punched me in the face with it. You could see him, you
Oh.
couldn't see me, but I asked him why he did it. And I mean, I have that recorded. And then he ended up going upstairs and later, I mean, it was a long, long evening. And the next morning, I just decided that was literally the first time I put a boundary in, which was very hard. I didn't go upstairs to see if he was okay. Because, we
Hmm.
always do that. We want to fix and we're like, are you okay? And even though I didn't do anything wrong, I would take the
Right.
blame.
Right.
And I didn't go. And he came downstairs and he was upset. It continued. And then I just tried to make it better. I was being more friendly because I was so scared. And then the days went by. And I mean, I was very uncomfortable. I was very scared to sleep next to him. I was just in survival mode at that time. A couple of weeks later, it was bad again. He started an argument over absolutely nothing. It was a Monday, and my son was just under 2 months old. And when he was escalating, I called my parents in Estonia on Skype because I was like, okay, if somebody's here with me, watching me, maybe
Yeah.
he won't be this way. I hadn't gone back to work yet. I contacted my boss. I said, I'm going to come to work today. If anybody asks, if he calls you, just say you asked me to come. Don't ask any more questions. Send him the email. my heart was pounding out of my chest. I had my bestest friend. She was on the phone. She was a long-time social worker and a therapist, so she was very, very,
Mm.
very good with me and supporting me through it. I just got myself, my son, a couple of things because I couldn't take anything, just make it seem like
Right.
I'm leaving. We started walking out, and my cat was there, and I was so afraid that he would do something to my cat, but I couldn't take him with me at that moment. And I said, "Okay, well, we love you. We're gonna go." And I had my dad still on Skype, and he didn't say anything back. And as I walked out, he's like, "You're not gonna even say you love me," when I just literally had said
Yeah.
that, and he rejected
Yeah.
me. And so I left. We drove to my work, told my boss that I had no idea about this. Nobody did, really how serious it was.
Yeah.
And I was like, listen, this is what's going on. I mean, he saw my baby then, and he's like, if you need any help, let me know. And I was like,
Mm.
okay, thank you. And then my friend, my therapist friend, she was on the phone with me the whole time as I drove to the police station. And this will bring me emotions just because that was probably like the bravest and scariest moment of my life. And
Yeah. I can imagine.
yeah, so it just takes me back. And definitely, I've done a lot of work around that, and I've gotten better with that. But it's not only me, it's my infant son. So we went, and my friend stayed on the phone with me, and she ended up sending her aunt who to be there for us as well. It was super chaotic. Like, my baby's crying. The police is like, okay, the police officer is going to call you, because they went to the house because he had threatened suicide as well. So they went,
Hmm.
the police, of course, and the court system is very difficult in America. We probably all kind of experienced that, who's been through domestic violence. And the police officer was saying things like, well, I just talked to him, and it seems like you guys are just young and you just need to, work it out. I told him to put some rose petals in the bathtub for you and run the water for you. And we had this aha brotherly moment. And I was like, what?
Wow. No,
Like,
man.
and at the very
No.
moment, my friend, I mean, I was in a shock anyway, but I was like, this is definitely not it. Anyway, so I had like 10 minutes to go back and get my stuff. I said, he has to be gone. I will not come there otherwise. I went with my friend's aunt and everything, and the police stayed there. I said, you need to stay there. I got my cat, I got our documents, and we left. And I went and filed for a restraining order the 2 days after, but he was already trying to hunt me down, going to my friends' houses, scaring people. I mean, people were scared. Went to my work, scared my boss, but my boss let me go. They fired me, and they did not give me also my pay they promised. They got so scared out of it.
Thanks.
And he also went and found my boss's ex-wife, because he was thinking somebody's hiding me. He got served the papers, but before that, I was able to go and get a couple of my things with police. He had locked the
Hmm.
doors. He had broken the keys off in the door, so I couldn't get in. And so when I went with my friend's aunt to get my stuff, 16 years of my life in America, and I was able to walk out with 2 bags, and everything just
Mm.
stayed in with him.
Yep.
And but, of course, it's just things like, that's not what I'm saying at all.
What you're talking about is it's more than that, because it's the
Yeah.
gravity of the situation is like you're literally running for your life. So it's just like if your
Yes.
house was on fire, you would be like,
Yes.
it's okay if this stuff burns as long as me, the cat, and the baby get out, right? Like that's the
That's
most
it.
important thing. I already have a vlog that's done a video about how to safely leave. And I think what Katre's talking about is that it's a lot of times you don't really have a plan. We wait until it escalates to the point
Mhm.
where like other people might have stayed, but something happened for you in that moment where you really knew it could be life or death, and that it's not just the quality of your life, it's your actual life. But there are ways to very quietly and stealthily make a plan to leave. And one of the most important is to not broadcast your plan, like not to tip your hand at all, right? As to
Agreed.
let the other person. Yeah. Okay. So then how did you get on your healing path from there?
After we had gotten to across the world, Estonia, it took me a little while. He ended up actually visiting for court order, and I had to pay for his trip to see me for U.S. court.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, it's super wild. I had child protective services and everybody with me. I wasn't alone. Anyway, and then that's the last time we saw him. But I mean, my baby was still so small, so I had a lot of focus on that, obviously. And then I was like, why? What's happening? I started listening to a lot of podcasts, and I came across a podcast where they were talking about how we go for people in our lives that are like a parent whose love we crave the most. I literally didn't know, I had never thought of it and never heard of it. Because for me, I was like, my family is the best. We're the tightest. Everything is wonderful. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. I was like, oh my gosh, it's my mother. And it just started. I mean, it was earth shattering. I'm sure anybody who's been through that can relate to that. You can't comprehend it, that's what's been going on. And then I started kind of unraveling from there. I did go to therapy, but I learned also from, thankfully, for social media and all the information out there in today's world, that I didn't need somebody who's trauma informed. And so oftentimes, I went maybe to a therapy and they're like, oh, well, we just let it go and the past is the past, or they don't really know about narcissism. And that's a very big deal when you're healing from narcissistic abuse, obviously. So I did struggle finding a good therapist. So I did do a lot of work on my own for a while. I started coming back to me, I started moving my body, and I started doing all of these things to make myself important again. And then as I was kind of unraveling my family issue, which became more, I would say, for me, much harder to heal from than that toxic relationship that I was. And also I was, in around them. And so that was very hard and triggering at times. I mean, I have had to go very low contact with them because it was destroying my mental health, and I will not pass that on to my son. I did find a good therapist that I went to for a while, which helped me and supported me. So I did like that, and we went back to my childhood and visited that and kind of did that work on my childhood, which was very helpful. And even going back to my childhood, was the biggest surprise for me was I didn't even go back to my childhood in my mind to say, Mom, why were you like that? But I went back and said, Dad, why didn't you protect me? And so that was another big revelation for me, because me and my dad are much closer, and he's the good guy, right?
With the other parent, a lot of times, like you said, we have them like the good one and the bad one to a degree. Once we figure out like what was going on, and then the mourning that has to come from when you realize that the one that you felt like was the good one also failed you. And I think that with whether you are abuse survivor or not, of course, there's going to be ways that our parents will fail us and have failed us, and us as parents have failed our kids. I'm just talking about regular failure. When you're talking about narcissistic abuse, this is inflicting damage. It's not just not doing it great, right? It's actually inflicting damage. And part of your story, Katre, is saying that you've repeated this pattern in relationships unknowingly, of course. And I talk about this as repeating relationship realities, because people don't know that this is what happens, the way the human mind works. And once you do, you can start looking for patterns, like what patterns in my life are not working for me? What patterns do I want to stop repeating, right? So it's almost like therapy for you gave you this lens to see your experience through, like, oh, it kind of makes sense that I recognize this person as appropriate sort of partner material because I had this experience in childhood.
Yeah, it's so true. And that was it. And I mean, it really extended to even my friendships, which I looked back to, and just a lot of these shallow and I'm not saying per se every friend that I had was bad. That's not what I'm saying at all. But the connections, and they were all very shallow. And looking back in my life, it's like I was always there for everybody. I felt like I'm like, I'm such a good person. Like, why is everybody leaving? But then because I was just giving and giving, and when I needed somebody, it was so it was, also in my friendships and definitely relationships. And I mean, people that I dated prior to him were similar on a lower degree. And it's not to compare. I mean, everybody has their story, and abuse is horrible no matter what. But it was definitely, looking back, I see very clearly what those traits are and what those dynamics are. That felt very normal. If you see other people who were in different relationships, I was like, is that possible? I didn't understand. That was normal. I thought everybody's doing this, and
of course. So this is your own experience. You have created a community on Facebook. You've created a safe space for people who are going through this. So talk a little bit about your motivation for doing that.
Yeah, it's been a journey. Once I got back to Estonia and I started on my path, I just was looking for, okay, I want to help somebody. It just kind of came upon that. And so I started actually a workout group for women. I'm also a trainer. And so I was like,
Mhm.
okay, I have my son, I can take him to the park with me. And we started. And I started kind of finding through that, okay, I like helping. I like seeing, how people improve their lives and women specifically. And I started sharing my story a little bit through my just giving workouts and, getting to know these women. And there were some that recognized the abusive relationship they were in. Somebody actually ended up separating from their husband. I didn't tell them, obviously, to separate. And that's also what
Sure.
you learn through therapy. You stop
Mhm.
telling people what to do, you let them come to their
Right.
own conclusions. So I was like, okay, wow, this is a lot of people are out there that are suffering through that and you don't even know. I
Mhm.
mean, we all have somebody in our lives. And so I started actually the Untamed Hero page on as a kind of a personal journal. I started just sharing the post and sharing my own post and resharing people's who I like or who I related to. And it started growing like super quick. And I was like, okay, so because everybody's related. So that means these people are relating to these things. And how many people
Right.
are there who are relating to this post about, going through a difficult relationship with their mom or their dad or in a abusive relationship and they don't think they can get out. And I was like, okay, I got to figure out a way to kind of pay it forward or give back in a way,
Mhm.
because I felt very alone when especially good people in your life do want the best for you, but they don't really know how to support you through something like abuse. If somebody's born in a healthy family and, semi-healthy family and goes through a normal, relationship, they can't really comprehend what it's like. And especially either
Right.
with to be in a relationship with an abusive person or having abusive parents. A lot of people will say, well, if their parent has, let's say, passed away, they're like, I can't even imagine I'd do anything to get my parent back. I'm
Mm.
like, okay, but it's very. For people.
It can be very
So
isolating,
yeah,
though, right? It's a very isolating experience, and I think that part of
very.
creating a community where I think it's similar to the work that I do, like creating a community so people can tell the truth about where they are, about what they're experiencing, without being judged, without feeling like a failure, without feeling like they need to take care of me or take care of you or take care of other people in the
Mhm,
group. It's like a place to, there's something like you have to admit where you are if you're going to
mhm.
change. And so I think that by you telling, sharing your story, what I hope, and I hope that this episode will create hope for people, is that you're someone who is thriving after this type of really bad narcissistic abuse and connecting the dots between your childhood experiences to then your repeated romantic relationships and then
Mhm.
actually getting out and stopping the cycle. Because here's the thing, when you really think about what you've done, is you're a cycle breaker, right? By protecting your son from this experience. So how much is he a motivating factor for you?
Oh, I mean, probably the biggest one. And you mentioned earlier that something clicked like when I decided that I will leave. And of course, we want to say I would leave for me and I'll get it out for me. But when I was holding my infant son there and I was sitting in this room with this person terrorizing me, I was like, no, this
Yep.
is ending here. Like it was like that, honestly. At that moment, I was like, I have to get out. I mean, it was very scary and it is scary. Like, I don't also want to say that it's easy to just get up and leave. It's very hard.
Mm-mm.
But like if you have kids, you or whatever it is, so whoever the person in your life is, it's your kids or I don't know, somebody, just use them as that motivation and fuel and push
Right.
forward. Like you don't have to stay there. You don't have to
Right.
stay.
Well, I super appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your experience. You guys, you can follow Katra at Untamed Hero on Instagram. You will love all the stuff that she posts, super inspiring. We'll put all the other information in the show notes, but I just want you to know that I really appreciate you and I appreciate you sharing your story and hopefully inspiring people to realize that they can do it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.